There's a bit of a story doing the rounds on legal Twitter at the moment. But I thought you might find it interesting because it raises all sorts of questions about what's going on at the moment with, people saying, oh, Elon Musk can be prosecuted for commenting on our sort of freedom of expression and right to protest and all that sort of thing. So I need to give you a little bit of background. It's to do with somebody called David Neuberger, or Lord Neuberger of Abbotsford or something like that anyway. He's the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's our Supreme Court, the old House of Lords. But when he retired, he took up a job on the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal. That's what replaced the old Privy Council when they booted us out in 1997. I don't know if you know, the Privy Council is a committee. I mean, effectively, it's pretty much the House of Lords, as was, but it sits on sort of obscure types of appeal. But it was also the final court of appeal for lots of Commonwealth countries, because of empire and all that sort of thing. Now, a lot of countries have since, got their own final highest appeal court, but it's still the appeal court for quite a lot of countries, but not Hong Kong. However, after 1997, lots of English judges stayed on in the Hong Kong courts. I mean, there's quite a lot of English judges there today. However, because of everything that's been going on politically, I mean, the deal was that they were meant to sort of keep the same system until 2047. And it's probably fair to say that they have been dialing back a little bit on that. I was in Hong Kong a little while ago, actually, and I don't know why people are always bad-mouthing the Chinese government. They gave me an app on my phone that gave me free internet. On the way back, I bumped into a lass from the Foreign Office, and she was just going, you're mad. I mean, they all use burner phones that they literally just drop in bins as soon as they arrive back home at the airport. But I'm not, I paid a lot of money at CEX for this phone, so I'm not throwing it away for anybody. But anyway, while we were over there, I did raise this, and they actually said, well, what are you going to do? Send the fleet in. And, I did point out we have two massive aircraft carriers. They pointed out we didn't have any planes for them, but I said we could probably borrow some. But anyway, the situation is that there were a bunch of English judges on this highest appeal court in Hong Kong. Since then, however, all but one of them have resigned, saying that they cannot be part of, justifying a system, trying to keep the rule of law, where they're saying that there's too much oppression and too much pressure. I mean, Lord Sumption used to be on it, and if Lord Sumption thinks a system is a bit despotic, I suppose that says a lot. But anyway, David Neuberger is still on there. Gets £40,000 for being for sitting as a judge there. And there's a case recently. It's all to do with protest. A bunch of people were protesting against the regime in a similar way to here, where you have to notify the authorities if you're doing a protest, whether it's a static protest or a procession, i.e. a moving protest. You have to inform them and get permission and agree to all sorts of conditions. I've done a video on that about our one. But they were refused permission for the march. They said you can have permission for a static protest, but not for the march. So the march went ahead and people did actually march, and they were all arrested and banged up in prison. They were actually convicted. They said, we're not convicting you of organising this, we're just convicting you of taking part. But this has gone all the way now to the highest court in the land, i.e. Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, as they call it over there. And what's interesting is they've applied UK law, and they've upheld the convictions, albeit on a 3-2 majority. And they actually used two English cases. They used a case called Ziegler and DPP, I say English, sorry, United Kingdom, and one about the abortion clinics in Northern Ireland. And let me just explain those two cases, because you'll need the context. Ziegler and DPP was about a bunch of people protesting an arms fair, and they blocked the road and they did all the locking on. They were convicted, but it went to appeal, and they said, well, we have an excuse, we have a defence of a reasonable excuse. We say that what we did was justified And it all ties back into all this sort of necessity type thing. They said, we need to protest. We're only going to be there blocking it for a little while. It's not a permanent thing, so it's very much like these road protests. And this is all before they changed the law that, anything more than, quote, minor disruption counted as the offence, which has now actually been dialed back again. So now you have to cause serious disruption. But the argument was they've caused serious disruption. But the court said, well, you can't raise reasonable excuse. There's no defence to this. You either do it or you don't. However, the appeal court said, well, no, applying the old laws on necessity and things like that, then maybe I'm just about to step over a rope, which is probably a stupid thing to do. But as you know, I like to get close to cliff edges because there's a spectacular view from here, and I'll keep talking while I tell you about it. So this went all the way to appeal. And the appeal court said, actually, you've got to leave reasonable excuse to the jury. And then it's a matter for the jury whether they believe that in the grand scheme of things, the protest was justified. And lots of people who support the right to protest cheered that decision on and went, hooray, this is fantastic. And lots of people who said, well, hang on, this is just giving smelly hippies a right to block traffic, and we object vociferously to it. So it was a swung decision, shall we just say. But then later, so after that decision, the right to protest and to cause disruptive protest, it was protected somewhat in that you could at least argue your case in front of a jury. However, there was a later case, and this is all to do with around abortion clinics in Northern Ireland. They have the equivalent of what we call here public space protection orders. And that can say you cannot protest within a certain geographical area. And in this case, it was within 200 metres of the clinics. And protest counts as anything, just physically being there, even if you didn't hold up signs or anything like that. We've seen these cases of people convicted for, quotes, silently praying. So it was all related to that. In that case, you see, the law specifically says there is not a defence of reasonable excuse. Effectively, it's almost strict liability. If you do any form of protest there, even if it's silent protest, you commit the offence. And they said, well, what about our Article 10 rights? So I just need to frame myself a little bit better in that frame. There we go, just so you can see the nice view. So Article 10, our right to freedom of expression, which includes things like protest. I mean, it's not, we say freedom of speech, but ironically, a silent protest falls within it because it's actually freedom of expression. They said, well, this is a breach of our Article 10 rights. Yes, it's a qualified right, but you can only interfere with that right if it is, quote, necessary, reasonable and proportionate in view, in accordance with having a democratic and free society. But there, the Supreme Court said, actually, no, the mere fact that there is no defence to this does not mean it breaches your Article 10 rights. And again, it was interesting. Lots of people were very happy about that on all sides of the spectrum because people who didn't like protesters said, good, there's now no excuse for protesting. But lots of people on the sort of progressive side, they were actually just happy with the decision that, yes, this stops people protesting outside abortion clinics. However, these cases, they're not just on a sort of, single case basis. This is now the law. So, you've got the situation now where it's being used against people, and people say, well, hang on, you are now stopping us protesting and raising reasonable excuse because, the abortion clinic case really watered back the argument in Ziegler and effectively, nullified it to a certain extent. I mean, we'd still do run necessity and reasonable excuse, like with the Colston statue and stuff like that. But it effectively said, it made it easy for judges not to allow this sort of defence to go before a jury. So you've got that situation now where people who previously were very in favour of a decision for various reasons are now very against it. But that was the argument they ran, and Neuberger supported and said, Ziegler effectively has been overruled. It's the Northern Ireland thing, and we're going to apply that. Now, you might be saying, why is a Chinese court applying English law? We have this idea, because, within the jurisdiction, the idea is that there's a hierarchy of courts, and lower courts are bound by the decision of the higher courts, although then you go step inside your local county court and some deputy district judge goes, I think the Court of Appeal got this wrong, and just do what they want. But that's the theory anyway, that those decisions are binding. But foreign decisions can often be persuasive, because even though all countries have their own different cultures and legal systems, the idea is that if somebody's already thrashed out all the arguments on a point, and courts have ruled on this and examined everything, well, that's a good starting point. So although decisions of foreign courts aren't binding, they are, as we often say, persuasive. And in this particular case, 3 of the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal said, we find the argument that Northern Ireland Abortion Services reflects the law on this persuasive, and we're going to apply it here. So these protesters, including this guy Jimmy Lai, he's a newspaper proprietor who very much supports the protesters. So you get into all these things about the media and supporting protests and clamping down on protests. It's that interface of law and politics, but also just the power. Media moguls using their influence to argue and agitate for a particular outcome in legal proceedings. But of course he's been banged up for ages. Now what people are saying is Neuberger shouldn't be sat on that court because by being there, and especially with his high status and high reputation, although he was also the guy who advised the post office and said, you want to get that judge recused. Remember, I did a video on that. It's one of my best performing videos actually, where they said, oh, this judge is biased because he's already ruled on lots of post office cases and found we're all a bunch of liars. So if he sits on ones in future, he already thinks we're a bunch of liars. So we need to get a different judge. And that was quite controversial because that application was definitely a try-on. I mean, the mere fact that a judge has ruled against you before does not mean he is biased, or there is an appearance of bias, which is the test, in future cases. So he does have a bit of, a mixed reputation. But yeah, so people are just saying though that it's just wrong for him to be sitting there. We've had similar things because, we have the cab rank rule where we have to accept instructions from anybody who wants to instruct us, regardless of what we think of them or their case, or indeed the effect that would have on our own professional reputation and indeed safety. Now that doesn't apply to foreign cases. You can turn down cases that aren't within England and Wales, and that's not a breach of cab rank. So people have criticised lawyers for acting for the Chinese government, although some other people have argued, and I'm a big fan of this, that cab rank, it's not just the letter of the law and the rule, it's a general principle. I mean, John Adams, the guy who defended the British soldiers who shot all the American revolutionaries back in 1776, as he said, I'd defend the devil himself because everybody is entitled to proper representation. So, that is the argument. But I just thought you might find it sort of interesting that it ties in with this whole idea of, should people be commenting on the laws of another country? Do we leave it up to them? The influence of people who have access to media. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Lai. I mean, not to sort of, I don't normally go into politics and things, but, I do think peaceful protest should be allowed. But then I can see the argument that people are saying, well, he's just the Chinese Hong Kong equivalent of Elon Musk. He's just sticking his nose in and using his influence and his media empire to agitate just for something he personally believes in. So, these are all the issues, and I'd be very interested to hear what you think about in the comments. As to David Neuberger himself, just a little anecdote. I used to be the internal assessor for qualifying sessions at Middle Temple, because when people are training, in the old days you just had to eat loads of dinners. That's all I had to do, was just eat 18 dinners to qualify. But now there's actually an educational element to it. They call it qualifying sessions, and people come and do talks and lectures and all sorts of things. And I used to have to fill the forms in for the Bar Standards Board as to whether they were good enough and providing proper education. And I had to do one because David Neuberger actually, he gave a speech about the Supreme Court and being the role of the Chief Justice. And I had to write, I said, it says, did the speaker show suitable knowledge of the subject? And I wrote, I found that David Neuberger, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, seemed to know quite a lot about the Supreme Court and the role of Chief Justice. So I'm going to give him a pass. And they did come back and say, "Oh, stop being so snarky about all that." But anyway, there you go. Like I say, this is a bit more sort of politics than law, but I'd be very interested in your comments. So hit me up, as the kids say. As always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely interesting, vaguely informative, etc., etc., vaguely accurate. If you did, please consider subscribing to Dan's channel, Black Belt Barrister, because he's like got over 500,000 subscribers now, and that's really good. And you know, let's try and get him to 1 million. Where am I today? I'm near somewhere called Bedruthen Steps. It's just like a lovely place on the north coast of Cornwall, and it's just got some very spectacular views. And I just thought, you know, just for a change, I would head up this way. So what I'll do is I'll just sweep around so that you can get a nice view of that. And also all those lovely pretty flowers in the background. And also I'll try and pull some faces because I can use this as the thumbnail. There you go. Do I look suitably knowledgeable and mystified or whatever about this decision? Like I say, I hope you grasped the gist of that. And actually, I'll just pan myself across so we see that bit as I'm walking back. But yeah, like I say, hit me up with all your comments.